I've been thinking about building a framework. I look at something like Waku, and it's very exciting to me. The idea of a minimal server component framework is great. And there's a lot of things about Next that are annoying. The biggest one is that after years of having shit DX, Next now has really good DX, but the warts of the decade to get there show more and more, I feel like. It's weird how often I notice the cracks they are trying to plug because they have to undo a bunch of the things they had built in the past. And I want something that takes what makes current version of Next great with none of the tech debt. Today's sponsor makes your backend way easier to manage for your React app. I could tell you all about it, but I'd rather just show you how nice it is to work with Convex. We're going to start with a little app I built in not much time as a way to test the T3 chat style experience. Sup, nerd. Notice something on that other side there? This is the Convex platform, and on the Convex platform, the data appears as soon as it happens. Watch what happens when I delete. Everything will always be in sync, and this is the magic of Convex. No more worrying about data being updated at the right time in the right place, no more worrying about stale data on some user's device, no more crazy weird fetch and polling work. You just ask for the data in your client. The code I have for the client here is actually comically simple. We have the use query for API messages list, send message, and then we just render the messages. There has to be a catch though, right? Like, is the backend really complex? Let's take a look. We can command click API messages list. It brings us to the backend code that's in the Convex folder in the same project, automatically deployed for you by them. In here, we have the query where I handle it by collecting the messages from DB and returning them. Okay, sending must be really complex then, right? Not really. We start by inserting body and author as a new message. I then list all of the messages and take the last 10. And then I submit those down here to an action. An action is a thing that runs outside of a quick update. So stuff that needs other sources or calls APIs or changes things more than once, that needs to be done through an action. So I schedule an action for right after we've created these messages, and I send the ID of this placeholder message. And again, because it's all type safe in TypeScript, I can just command click the action and see here where we are generating the data that we send to OpenAI. Well, in this case, we are sending it to Gemini. Same difference. I stream the text, send it all over, and every time a new chunk comes in, I update the data with ctx.runMutation to keep it up to date on the backend. So how do we update the client? They do. As long as the data exists in database, the user is seeing the right data. No more weirdness trying to manage the relationship between those things. No more chaos of trying to keep people in sync. Everything you want to build, from a simple CRUD app to a massively collaborative Figma clone, is significantly simpler with an architecture like Convex's, and I do hope I can start moving more things over to them soon. Thank you to Convex for sponsoring today's video. Check them out today at soydev.link/convex. But what I've realized as I think about it more and more is two things. The first is that I would literally just be rebuilding Next. Like, I wouldn't have a lot that I would change. I would probably add a config routing option because I like config-based routing a lot. I'd get rid of a bunch of the magic exports because I fucking hate those. I might have like one config one, that's it. It would mostly be like a cleanup and like how minimally can I recreate what I like about Next. I'd almost be doing like what Preact did to React to Next.js, which sounds great and all, except for the fact that whenever I think I've like nailed in what I would want that to be, some crazy mind-blowing thing happens with Next that fundamentally changes how I would have built it if I had. The big one recently was Dynamic I/O. Dynamic I/O is a huge change in how caching and reusing pieces in Next.js works. Now, by default, instead of having a crazy compiler hack that tries to guess which elements are dynamic and are static, as well as weird magic exports that orchestrate all of that, which I would have had to build all of, by the way, now they just use the async nature of the dynamic code to identify when things should or shouldn't be dynamic. So instead of a bunch of weird compiler hacks, now there's a single runtime hack, which runs the React render process, takes the output, and then kills all of the async parts before they can respond. This is the key part that if I had already built a framework before I learned about this would have pissed me off to no end, because this code here with the double set immediate lets you skip the whole async queue and eject with the synchronous parts super simply. I would have been in the process of building a crazy compiler for all of this to try and get close to the quality of experience that you get from this hack. And this hack and its discovery makes the whole concept of building this framework much easier. And it also makes the resulting DX much better. So you would think I would look at this and be like, oh, now's the time. I have all the parts I need. It's actually had the opposite impact on me because I felt similarly a year ago. And if I'd started working on this a year ago, I'd be almost ready to have like a V0 of it right now. And then I would have seen this, and I would have had to either throw away half of the stuff I did or entirely rethought it and built something separate in a different direction. And I would very quickly end up in the same place that has caused me to have this problem with Next. I would just be wrapping tech debt with tech debt until I find the right solution. I think we're getting very close to not like perfect, but the size of these changes is getting smaller every year. In 2021, we got server components and app router, which were huge, monumental changes to the way that we operate with all these things. They had a ton of rough edges and we smoothed out a bunch since. The year after, we got server actions, which were even rougher around the edges, but offered even more cool potential wins with a bunch of weird catches that I still run into all the time. Here's a fun one you might not have known. I learned this in the 1 app 5 stacks video. In a server action, if you call revalidate path, it nukes all of the cache entities in that path. So if you have, in my case, a giant cached entity for get 2 random Pokemon, because in here, I have to call get all Pokemon, and this has a forever cache life because I want this to just be there forever. When you call revalidate page, it nukes the cache. But if you call cookie.set, it doesn't. So if I wanted to improve the performance of this, I could do this instead. Let me grab the cookies call, which, by the way, if you're curious why cookies is async, it's to do this dynamic thing where it knows it's dynamic because it's async. So if I do this and just set jar.nothing to JSON stringify math.random, this will now be a significantly faster experience because I changed from a revalidate to a cookie update. And if I had nothing here, then nothing would happen because something told the browser to update or sent the update to the browser. By putting this here, now when you click the button, the server will generate the updated HTML and send it down as the response that the JavaScript can now take over and render correctly. But if I do the revalidate path option, it ends up being way, way slower. This behavior is not documented fucking anywhere. I had to talk to the team and they were wrong about it. They checked and they're like, oh, wow, you are right about that. We should put that in the docs. The amount of these behaviors that have snuck in is great enough that I would understand why anyone would be upset. That said, these are edge cases around performance for lunatics like myself to dive into. This will all be smoothed out over time. I should expect this being as early to these things as I am, using the new dynamic IO stuff and the use cache stuff and using all these parts. I'm surprised they even work. The fact that they're not perfectly documented yet is fair, but it shows how many of these behaviors are necessary when you're building an environment as inherently complex as this. And I could go build my own slightly simpler thing, but by the time I'm done, 5 more things will have happened that I want to add, and now I have the same exact complexity problem, but much less time and incentive to build it. So, yeah, there's a couple ways you could frame this. On one hand, you could say that I like Next.js so much, and I trust them to do the right things, so I don't want to build my own framework. The other way you could frame it is things are changing too fast, and if I tried to keep up, I would go insane and die. The reality is somewhere between those two, and I would argue the reality is also much more excited. I love the new things and the new ideas the Next team and the React teams keep coming up with and the benefits that we as an ecosystem get from it. And I don't think every framework is going to adopt all of these things, but I've been surprised how many things not even inside of the React ecosystem are. Like I know the Elixir guys are trying to adopt some of the streaming benefits so they can stream the shell before the data query comes through. I know that people over in the Vue world are trying to figure out how to take advantage of server-only components and the orchestration between those things. I know the work is going in to take these wins and bring them other places, and that's really exciting. It's so exciting that I kind of want to just sit back and watch. As fun as it would be to throw my hat in the ring, it would take away my excitement for the new things, and that's what I'm most scared of. I know a lot of people who get frustrated with new React releases because it inherently means more work for them. It means they have to add new features to their framework. It means that their plugin or their library built around React might have new edge cases and bugs to deal with. If I was one of the people building around and heavily into these things, it would be a lot more stressful when these new things come out. And I might be less excited as a result. And that's a thing I do not want to change. I want to maintain my excitement about these new things because they're fucking really exciting. There is so much cool shit going on in this ecosystem that I don't want to re-implement where it is today and ignore where it is tomorrow. I just want to enjoy it while I can and see what happens next. And that's why I'm not building a framework. It is tempting. I see roughly what it would look like now, but what it would look like is just minimal Next.js that's always 6 months behind on features. And I don't want to build that. I want to build the best thing and use the best things for what I build. And for better or worse, right now, that is absolutely Next.js. It's the right balance of functionality, support, and awesome new features, resulting in an experience for my users that is really hard to replicate elsewhere. If we actually look at the code for the turbo version of this, for example, which in case you haven't seen the original video, so here's that Next RSC version. If I go to the turbo version and I just hammer the button, this is in the dev server and it's still that fast. In prod, it's even faster, believe it or not. The reason this version is so fast is a couple of hacks that I snuck in. By a couple, I really just mean one. So I render the current Pokemon either as a random pair, or if you have a cookie for it, I use the cookie for the 2 Pokemon that you have. I also define next pair as 2 different random Pokemon. Now, when you actually click the button to vote on one of them, I record the battle, I update the cookies to be next pair. I'm not doing anything special here. I'm not passing the value down. I'm not calling out to the browser, hey, this is data I need, embed it in the HTML. I'm not doing all of these steps to get this data so I can use it as a cookie on this action. I'm just writing the obvious simple code, which is I have this cookie, I have this value that I want to be the next cookie, I just set it. That's so nice. I've never had this elegant an experience dealing with cookies and massive performance optimizations, because previously this took a lot more work. It has catches, like if I turn on the revalidate path again, now it's revalidating that giant cache thing and it's gonna take way longer, but as long as I comment that out and I update this, it's now immediate. And the reason you feel the performance difference is right up here, I have a hidden div that renders the pictures for the 2 next Pokemon. So as a result of that, when I go to the console and I look at the network tab, it just fetched number 730 and 352. That's not these 2. But if I vote, 730 and 352 are next, because again, I have given the browser the context, not in the sense that it knows what is next, but the HTML has what is next, so it can get the data that it needs, and then the server just updates the HTML. It's hilarious how simple this solution is. And the reason this solution can be this simple and elegant is because Next has figured out all the primitives for the most part. Every other framework takes more effort to do this. There are different ways to get different performance optimizations, and we were able to make the Elixir version fly, but it's way more complex, and we had to do a lot of different things to make the performance that good, and we had to work around double server render behaviors and shit. Here you don't have to. There's no workaround here. This is just the simple, focused code that describes what I'm trying to do. That's why I'm excited. I want my code to not look like it's framework specific. I want my code to describe exactly what is happening, and for the behavior to behave how you expect. The less you have to learn the framework and the more you just have to know JavaScript, the better. And that's why I'm excited about Next. And that's also, to sum up this video, why I'm not building a framework. This came out better than I expected, I think, so I have no idea which channel it's going to end up on. Let me know if you thought this was a good video, because it's very different from what I normally do. Until next time, please don't build a framework.